When we first encounter the Heart Sutra, there is a moment that can feel almost shocking. The sutra has already told us that form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. It has taken us beyond the ordinary ways in which we understand the body, the mind, perception, feeling, and consciousness. But then it goes even further. It says there is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation of suffering, and no path. These are not minor teachings. They are the Four Noble Truths, the very foundation of Buddhist practice. The Buddha began his teaching with suffering, its origin, its cessation, and the path leading to its cessation. So why would the Heart Sutra appear to say that none of these exist? If we read these words superficially, we may think the Heart Sutra is rejecting the Buddha's original teaching. We may wonder whether Buddhism ultimately says that suffering is not real, karma does not matter, liberation does not exist, and meditation is unnecessary. But that is not what the Heart Sutra is saying. The deeper meaning is much more subtle. The Heart Sutra is not destroying the Four Noble Truths. It is removing our tendency to turn them into fixed, independent things. It is showing us that even the most precious Buddhist teachings are empty of inherent existence. To understand this, we need to remember the central teaching of the Heart Sutra: emptiness. Emptiness does not mean that nothing exists. It means that nothing exists independently, permanently, or from its own side. Everything arises through causes and conditions, relationships, designations, perceptions, and circumstances. Things function, but they do not possess an isolated essence that exists completely by itself. Imagine standing beside a river and watching a whirlpool form in the water. You can clearly see it. You can point toward it and say, "There is a whirlpool. It has a shape. It moves. It can become stronger or weaker. You can even observe how long it lasts. But if you try to find the independent substance called whirlpool, you will not find one. There is only water moving in a particular pattern because of particular conditions. Remove those conditions, and the whirlpool disappears. The whirlpool is not non-existent. You experienced it. But it does not exist independently from the water, the movement, the riverbed, gravity, and countless other conditions. The Four Noble Truths are similar. Suffering exists. Its causes exist. Freedom from suffering exists. The path exists. But none of these possesses an independent essence. They arise dependently. They function within a network of conditions. The Heart Sutra asks us to see beyond the labels and discover the emptiness of everything to which those labels refer. This distinction between conventional truth and ultimate analysis is essential. On the conventional level, we experience suffering. A person can lose someone they love and experience grief. A person can become attached to something and experience anxiety when it changes. A person can become angry and feel the burning intensity of anger in the body and mind. These experiences should never be dismissed. Buddhism does not ask us to pretend that pain is imaginary. But when we investigate suffering deeply, we cannot find a permanent, independent object called suffering existing by itself. Suffering depends upon conditions. It depends upon perception, interpretation, craving, resistance, memory, expectation, identification, and countless other factors. Change the conditions, and the experience changes. Remove the conditions, and that particular form of suffering may disappear. This is why the Heart Sutra can say, "No suffering," without denying suffering. Think of a flame in a lamp. You can see the flame clearly. It gives light and warmth. Yet where exactly is the flame? Is it the wick? Is it the oil? Is it the oxygen? Is it the heat? Is it the chemical reaction? Is it something separate from all of these? The flame exists, but only dependently. It has no isolated essence that can be found apart from its conditions. Suffering is like this. We experience it, but it is not an independent substance sitting inside us. It is a dependent process. Now consider the second noble truth, the origin of suffering. Buddhism teaches that craving, grasping, ignorance, and other conditions contribute to suffering. But the Heart Sutra says there is no cause of suffering. Again, this does not mean that craving has no consequences. It means that the cause itself is empty. Consider a shadow cast across a wall. You can see the shadow, but you cannot pick it up and carry it away in your hands. The shadow depends upon light, an object, a surface, and a particular relationship between them. Change the light or move the object, and the shadow changes. The shadow has a visible effect, but it has no independent existence. In the same way, craving is not an eternal substance hiding somewhere inside the mind. Craving arises because of conditions. A pleasant experience may lead to wanting more. Memory may strengthen the wanting. Fear may add urgency. Identification may turn a simple preference into, I must have this. Repetition may make the pattern stronger. Ignorance may prevent us from seeing the process clearly. Because craving depends upon conditions, it can also change when conditions change. This is one of the most hopeful aspects of Buddhist practice. If craving were an independent substance, we would have no way to transform it. If anger were a permanent essence, there would be no possibility of freedom. If fear were an unchanging identity, meditation could never touch it. But because these experiences arise dependently, they can also cease dependently. This brings us to the third noble truth, cessation. The Buddha teaches that suffering can cease when its conditions are understood and released. Yet the Heart Sutra says there is no cessation. Because cessation itself must not become another object of attachment. Sometimes spiritual seekers imagine liberation as a permanent object that they will eventually acquire. They imagine that somewhere there is a final state called enlightenment, and one day they will possess it. But this way of thinking subtly turns enlightenment into another thing. The seeker becomes attached to liberation in the same way that an ordinary person becomes attached to possessions. The Heart Sutra cuts through this tendency. There is no independently existing cessation waiting somewhere to be possessed. Cessation is understood through the ending of conditions. When grasping is released, the suffering dependent upon grasping no longer arises in the same way. When ignorance is illuminated by wisdom, the patterns dependent upon ignorance change. Liberation is therefore not the discovery of some permanent object called nirvana. It is freedom from the mistaken grasping that continually creates the sense of bondage. Imagine a knot in a piece of cloth. When you look at the knot, you may think, there is a knot. But where is the knot separate from the threads? There is no independent object called knot sitting inside the cloth. The knot is a particular relationship among the threads. When the relationship changes, the knot disappears. You do not have to destroy the cloth to destroy the knot. Likewise, liberation does not require destroying life, the body, the senses, or the world. It requires understanding the patterns of grasping that create bondage. This is why the Heart Sutra's teaching is so radical. It does not simply tell us to escape experience. It asks us to see experience correctly. Then we arrive at the fourth noble truth, the path. The Buddha taught a path of practice. Ethical conduct, meditation, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, and the other aspects of the path provide the conditions through which suffering can be understood and released. Yet the Heart Sutra says there is no path. Again, this is not an instruction to abandon practice. It is an instruction not to turn the path into something possessing an independent existence. Imagine crossing a lake in a boat. The boat is essential if you are on the water and need to reach the other shore. You would be foolish to say, since the boat is ultimately empty, I do not need it. At the same time, once you reach the shore, you do not carry the boat on your back forever simply because it helped you cross. The teaching is similar. The path is necessary. Practice matters. Meditation matters. Ethical conduct matters. Compassion matters. Wisdom matters. But the practitioner must eventually understand that the path itself is empty. If you become attached to the path as an identity, the path can become another form of bondage. A person might begin thinking, I am a serious meditator. Then the identity becomes important. They compare their meditation with someone else's. They become proud of their retreats. They become disappointed when their mind is restless. They begin protecting the image of being spiritual. The path that was supposed to free the mind has quietly become another structure for the ego. The Heart Sutra sees this danger. It tells us that even the path is empty. This does not make the path meaningless. It makes the path liberating. Think of a musical instrument being carefully tuned. The musician adjusts one string, then another. If a string is too tight, it is loosened. If it is too loose, it is tightened. The purpose is not to worship the tuning process. The purpose is to allow the instrument to function harmoniously. Buddhist practice is similar. We cultivate what leads toward freedom and release what creates bondage. But we do not need to create another rigid identity around being a practitioner. This is the middle way. On one side is nihilism. Nothing exists, so nothing matters. On the other side is eternalism. Everything has a permanent essence and exists exactly as it appears. The Heart Sutra avoids both extremes. It does not say that suffering is non-existent in the ordinary sense. It says suffering is imperfect of inherent existence. It does not say that craving has no consequences. It says craving is empty and dependently arisen. It does not say that liberation is meaningless. It says liberation cannot be grasped as an independently existing thing. It does not say that the path should be abandoned. It says the path itself is empty of fixed essence. This is the wisdom of the middle way. The Four Noble Truths operate perfectly at the conventional level. There is suffering. There are conditions that produce suffering. There is freedom from suffering. There is a way of practice that leads toward freedom. Without this framework, Buddhist practice would lose its practical foundation. But when we examine these truths with profound wisdom, we see that none can be found as an independent, permanent entity. The Heart Sutra is therefore not contradicting the Buddha's teachings. It is revealing their emptiness. This distinction becomes especially important when we face suffering in our own lives. Suppose someone insults you. The words enter the ears. You interpret them. Memory becomes involved. Your sense of self becomes involved. Perhaps an old wound is touched. Anger appears. You begin replaying the conversation. You imagine what you should have said. You imagine what you will say next time. A few words spoken for a few seconds can become hours of suffering. If we look carefully, we can see that the suffering was not contained inside the original words. It arose through a chain of conditions. The sound itself was one condition. Your interpretation was another. Your memory was another. Your identification was another. Your resistance was another. Your repeated thinking was another. The suffering was dependently constructed. This is what emptiness allows us to see. And when we see this clearly, something remarkable happens. We begin to understand that we do not have to fight the suffering as though it were an enemy standing outside us. We can investigate the conditions from which it arises. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" we can ask, "What is this feeling dependent upon?" Instead of saying, "I am angry," we can observe, "Anger is arising." Instead of saying, "I am suffering," we can investigate, what conditions are supporting this suffering right now? This shift may seem small, but it is profound. The first statement creates identification. The second creates observation. The first turns a passing experience into an identity. The second allows us to see its dependent nature. This is not merely a change in vocabulary, it is a change in relationship. The Heart Sutra invites us to see that even the person who suffers is empty. This does not mean that you do not exist. It means that the you who suffers is also dependently arisen. Body, sensations, perceptions, memories, habits, relationships, language, culture, experiences, and consciousness come together to create the experience we call me. There is no permanent suffering person hidden somewhere behind all of these conditions. This is why emptiness and compassion belong together. If the self were completely independent and isolated, compassion would be difficult to understand. But when we see that our lives arise through relationships and conditions, we recognize how deeply interconnected suffering is. A harsh word can affect another person. A kind word can affect another person. Our actions influence others. Their actions influence us. Conditions flow through relationships. The insight of emptiness does not make us careless. It makes us more responsible. If everything were isolated and independent, nothing would affect anything else. But because everything arises dependently, what we do matters. This is one of the great misunderstandings about emptiness. Some people hear, "Everything is empty," and conclude, "Then nothing matters." The Heart Sutra points toward the opposite conclusion. Because things are empty, transformation is possible. Because things are empty, compassion matters. Because things are empty, suffering can cease. Because things are empty, wisdom can arise. Because things are empty, a person who has lived for years in anger can learn to respond differently. If our patterns possessed permanent essence, transformation would be impossible. Emptiness is therefore not the denial of possibility. Emptiness is the ground of possibility. A seed provides another beautiful way to understand this. A seed does not contain a fully formed tree hidden inside it. The tree arises through soil, water, sunlight, air, time, nutrients, and countless conditions. The seed is empty of an independent tree, yet precisely because it is not a fixed tree, it can participate in the arising of a tree. Our minds are similar. We are not fixed beings with permanent emotional identities. A person who is angry today is not permanently an angry person. A person who is afraid today is not permanently a fearful person. A person who is confused today is not permanently a confused person. Because these states arise through conditions, the conditions can be understood and transformed. This is why the Buddha's path remains meaningful within the Heart Sutra. We practice because conditions matter. We cultivate mindfulness because attention matters. We cultivate compassion because intention matters. We cultivate wisdom because understanding changes the way experience is constructed. We cultivate ethical conduct because actions create conditions. But while practicing, we learn not to cling to the practitioner, the practice, the achievement, or the result. This is the freedom of the Heart Sutra. At first we may think, I am suffering and I need to follow the path to reach liberation. Later we begin to see, suffering arises through conditions and the path changes those conditions. Finally, wisdom sees that the sufferer, the suffering, the path, and liberation are all empty of independent existence. And yet compassion continues, practice continues, life continues. This is not nihilism, it is freedom from fixation. The Heart Sutra is therefore asking us to release even our attachment to Buddhist concepts. The Four Noble Truths are like medicine. If someone is seriously ill, medicine can be essential. But imagine becoming so attached to the bottle that you forget to take the medicine. The purpose of the teaching is transformation, not intellectual possession. The Buddha's teachings are medicine for the mind. The Heart Sutra takes us one step further and asks us not to turn even the medicine into an object of grasping. This is why the sutra can say, no suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path. It is not saying, there is no need to practice. It is saying, do not grasp suffering as inherently existing. Do not grasp its cause as inherently existing. Do not grasp cessation as inherently existing. Do not grasp the path as inherently existing. Everything depends upon conditions. Everything changes. Nothing can be possessed as an independent essence. And when the mind stops demanding that things possess such an essence, a tremendous burden begins to fall away. We no longer have to make every experience into me or mine. Pain can be pain without becoming my permanent identity. Anger can be anger without becoming who I am. Fear can arise without becoming my future. Even spiritual progress can unfold without becoming my achievement. This is where the Heart Sutra becomes a living teaching rather than merely a philosophical text. The next time suffering appears, do not immediately try to push it away. Pause. Look carefully. What conditions are present? What thought appeared before the emotion? What expectation is being defended? What are you clinging to? What are you resisting? What story is the mind creating? And then look even more deeply. Can you find a permanent suffering anywhere? Can you find a permanent sufferer? Can you find a permanent cause? Can you find a permanent path? Can you find a permanent liberation that can be possessed? The more deeply you look, the more you may discover that experience is fluid, interconnected, and dependently arisen. This does not make life meaningless. It makes life workable. It means that the painful moment in front of you is not a prison built from permanent walls. It is a process, and processes can change. The Four Noble Truths show us how suffering arises and how freedom becomes possible. The Heart Sutra shows us that every part of that process is empty of independent existence. The Buddha gave us the map. The Heart Sutra asks us not to mistake the map for a permanent reality. The map is useful because it points. The path is useful because it transforms. The teachings are useful because they lead us beyond grasping. But ultimately, wisdom asks us to release even our attachment to the map, the path, and the idea of arrival. This is why the Heart Sutra is not a rejection of the Buddha's teaching. It is the flowering of the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha teaches suffering so that we may understand it. He teaches its origin so that we may understand its conditions. He teaches cessation so that we may know freedom is possible. He teaches the path so that we may walk toward freedom. And the Heart Sutra teaches us to look deeply enough to see that none of these possesses an independent essence. When this insight becomes clear, we no longer need to run away from suffering or desperately chase enlightenment. We learn to see, we learn to understand, we learn to release. And perhaps this is the deeper invitation of the Heart Sutra. Not to believe that suffering does not exist, but to stop giving suffering more solidity than it possesses. Not to deny the path, but to walk it without clinging. Not to deny liberation, but to stop imagining liberation as something the ego can possess. There is suffering when conditions for suffering are present. There is freedom when the conditions for bondage are released. And both suffering and freedom are empty. When the mind truly understands this, the Four Noble Truths are no longer merely four statements to believe. They become a way of seeing. And when seeing becomes clear, the grip of suffering begins to loosen. This is the profound paradox of the Heart Sutra. It takes away nothing that is truly necessary. It takes away our attachment to the things we imagined were solid. And in that empty space, wisdom becomes possible.